Our moderator tonight is the wonderful Marion Renault, who is a recent graduate of SHERP, but has already done amazing work, including this month's cover story on New Republic, in the New Republic, which I strongly recommend. And Marion is a wonderful choice to anchor this event tonight, because we're going to be talking about the future, the present and future of specialized coverage in regional and local markets. And that's been a sort of a grim story over the last 20 years, as most people know. But there's also a lot of exciting things happening now. And Marion is herself a veteran of covering the environment and health for regional markets. And so she's a very good person to do this tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Marion.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. So tonight we're going to be talking about the challenges and the opportunities of specialized science, health, and environmental coverage for a regional, local market. It's a really interesting time, I think, for us to be talking about this. There are so many outlets and programs and institutions that are now dedicated to improving this kind of coverage, even though, as Dan mentioned, there have been some grim stories in this space, from Report for America to ProPublica's local reporting network to regional outlets like the Texas Tribune, High Country News, the Block Club for Chicago. Here in New York, we have the City. There are centers for investigative reporting now in Kentucky, Wisconsin, California, Florida, Oklahoma, the Midwest, Northeast. It goes on and on. As Dan also mentioned, we're very lucky to be joined tonight by two reporters. We have Sabrina Shankman. She is the climate crisis reporter at the Boston Globe. Her coverage has really focused on Massachusetts climate goals and what the state is actually doing, what's getting in the way of those goals. She's been at the Globe since May. Before that, she spent 8 years covering the Arctic for Inside Climate News. Before that, she was at PBS Frontline. She reported for ProPublica. She got her start as a crime reporter at the Taunton Daily Gazette and got her master's in journalism at Berkeley. So thank you, Sabrina, for being here. We also have Rose Hoban, who founded North Carolina Health News. She's also an editor and a legislative correspondent there. Prior to 2012, when she launched NCHN, Rose spent 6+ years as a health reporter at North Carolina's public radio station, WUNC. She spent a decade before she was a journalist practicing as a registered nurse, and when she got her journalism degree from Berkeley as well. I made that connection later. She also got her master's in public health policy at the same time. So thank you, Rose, as well, for being with us. I wanted to start with you, Sabrina. In our conversation leading up to tonight, you had mentioned that part of your role as a climate crisis reporter at the Globe was telling the climate story to people who haven't heard it before. In your words, there's this huge audience of people who haven't been invited in ever. So I'd love to start, what does stepping outside of the climate silo, the climate news silo mean to you, and how has it changed how you approach your beat now? I think so.
Okay. I was really lucky to get to spend several years reporting for Inside Climate News. And one of the things that I loved about doing that work was that it was such a smart, well-informed audience of policymakers and scientists and experts. And what I found when I moved to the Boston Globe that I didn't, necessarily realize was going to be so much the case was that I was able to really communicate to a brand new audience, in the sense that though the Globe has covered climate change as part of its environmental coverage in the past, it's never really dedicated itself to it fully in the way that it is now. And the problem is, climate change is the story that everyone needs to be a part of. Like, if we're actually going to rise to the occasion of this challenge, everyone needs to be a part of it. But if you put these barriers up that makes people turn away because it seems like you're excluding them based on the way that you're writing, or you're kind of diving into the middle instead of starting at the beginning, then it turns people off, right? I mean, I get it. And so, one of the very first stories that I wrote was this summer, in June, there was a big heat wave, and thinking about, okay, well, how can we explain the events in the natural world that everyone is experiencing in a way that lets you know, like, well, all right, so here's what you're feeling, here's what you see, here's what the science says about what climate change is doing, and here's what the experts who are really deep on this, who are spent decades on this, can tell you to understand the world around you right here. So it's not a foreign thing. It's not intimidating. It's just letting you know about the world you're in, and I feel like it's a space I'm really happy to be in.
And just what has been most challenging about going from that audience that you had at ICN to the one that you have now at the Globe? What have been what's the learning curve for learning, as you said, how to tell a story from the very beginning and not starting at the middle?
Well, one of my learning curves is I keep pitching these like incredibly wonky, dorky stories that my editor will be like, I can understand why that feels interesting, but that might not be a Globe story, or at least not in the way that you're imagining it. But for the most part, though our coverage is trying to invite more people in under the umbrella, Massachusetts is a hub of science and environmental advocacy and technology, innovation, and so there are people who are very well versed in this stuff. And so, really, people are right there along with me. I mean, the challenges are always seeing through, I feel like there's like a shotgun blast of stories that I could be writing on any given day, and trying to understand, like, well, what is the most important to our readers and what needs to be done now and how to prioritize that, because on this beat, like, there are endless numbers of things you could be doing.
And Rose, what's extremely interesting, I think, about having you here tonight is that you felt this impulse for entrepreneurial journalism to start NCHC. Can you tell us a little bit and bring us back to why you decided to start your own publication?
Well, when I always tell the story that when I started the WNC in 2005, I was in the Research Triangle area, like the Boston area, where you can't swing a dead cat but hit a PhD, and there were 5 people reporting on healthcare at the News and Observer. And, they were my competition, and they would run stories, and my editor would be like, oh, why don't you do that story? And I'd be like, well, there's 5 of them, and there's 1 of me. And then, McClatchy got bought by Knight Ridder, and then the economy crapped out, and they had all that debt, and all of a sudden they started shedding a lot of people getting offered buyouts. So then there were 3 people reporting on healthcare, and then there were 2, and then I looked around in 2010, 2011, was like, oh my God, I'm the sole survivor. Like, they were all gone. And I was the one left. And when I was thinking about starting the website, I did some market research. I started calling around to friends and people that I knew at different papers around the state. I was like, do you have a healthcare? They're like, oh God, no, that person got laid off in 2005. They got buyout in 2008. So I realized that, like, in 2000, there had been maybe like 16 to 18 people around the state who were thinking about healthcare for journalism. And by the time I was going to launch in late 2011, there were 3, and I was one of them. And so I realized that there was a niche, a market niche that I could fill. And people were like, oh, you're a journalistic entrepreneur. And I have always said, stick the word reluctant in front of that, because it just felt like there was this imperative. Like, this was when the Affordable Care Act was being implemented. There was all this really complicated stuff happening that needed to be explained, not to mention that there were seismic shifts happening at our state legislature in healthcare policy. We had a shift from all Democratic administrations with Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate at the state level, to it completely flipping over for the first time in 110 years to being completely Republican. And so there was a lot of payback, there was a lot of political payback, but there was a lot of changes in health policy that were taking place. And so I just felt like people needed to know. And oddly enough, I gave up like a big audience in public radio for a smaller audience, but the ability to do more work Well, I don't know what I was thinking, but you can do like when you're doing a feature story, and I mean, I love public radio, but especially in those days, things were kind of precious. You had to drive out and like interview the person in person, and your sound had to be super clean and blah blah blah. Now, of course, after COVID, everybody's like, yeah, crappy Zoom video, and and the sound is good enough, but it was really restraining my ability to tell all the stories I wanted to tell. Like you, felt like I had a shotgun blast. I love that, of all these stories that I wanted to tell, and I was so limited. And then, in radio, you're really always skimming the surface, right? We would write these, what we called in the newsroom, news farts at the top of the hour, right? 45 seconds. Like, how deep can you get in 45 seconds, right? And so I was like, wow, I get to write 1,000 words, so that was really what I was looking to do. That was just the hole I just saw needing to be filled.
And that actually segues to something else I wanted to talk about tonight, which is that it can feel really grim to think about the news landscape, in my own experience, I entered a newsroom right out of college. I had an undergrad degree in journalism, and it was a newsroom that had gone through layoffs and a failed union attempt, and it had just been purchased by another, corporate owner, and it can be really grim. But tonight's conversation is really about the democratic value of having not only sort of local watchdogs for policy and governance, but also for health policy, also for health crises and the climate crisis. I'd be really curious to hear both of you answer, why is it so important to have also this specialized coverage be provided by local regional journalists and outlets?
You want to start?
Sure, I'll go first. Okay. Massachusetts is really interesting to be covering climate change. It's not dissimilar from New York or California, but in Massachusetts, there is legally binding legislation that passed earlier this year that says you have to do certain things. You have to cut your emissions in half by 2030, which is like tomorrow, basically. And you have to get down to net zero by 2050. And so as soon as I came in, not long after that legislation had passed, that gave me almost like my marching orders, because if we have a goal, then we have something to measure against. But you have to watch really carefully, because every day there's something else that's happening, whether it's the slow march toward achieving that goal via changes in the way that the utilities are going to deliver their power, whether it's changes in the way that legislators are going to approach this at the city level, at the state level. I mean, there are questions still about, can a community choose to say no new buildings can be using fossil fuels? Right now, the answer is that doesn't exist. A community can't do that. They're working to change it still, but there are all these different things. And so unless you are truly dedicated to following this and incredibly dorky, you're probably going to miss a lot of these little things that happen along the way. And so that's why I like to be able to just kind of laser focus in on this. I think it's hard because, again, there are so many things happening that it's really easy to miss them. I mean, Boston is a really interesting and progressive place. Massachusetts is too, but you also have, a place where they reached their earlier climate goals largely by expanding the footprint of natural gas in the state. So now what do, right? You cut your emissions to a certain extent with natural gas, but now we're learning the emissions are actually a lot worse than we thought that they were. And also, now that you've convinced all these people to heat their homes in this way, how do you very quickly get them to change? And so, without having that very localized eye trained on this, it's easy to miss this. I mean, and this is a story that could be told by far more people, too, in Massachusetts, and in every single state there's something similar, because even if it's a state that is sort of reluctant to come on board, there are things happening. Like, you might go to a place like Oklahoma or Texas where maybe there might be some political resistance, but maybe they're embracing wind, or maybe there's this kind of undeniable economic shift toward clean energy. So how do you kind of look at what's happening, who's standing in the way, who's lobbying against that work, if you're not really trained in on it, it'll be easy to miss. But if we're, again, like if we're actually going to do the things that we say we're going to do, or that we say we're going to do in Paris, that we kind of said again that we're going to do in Glasgow, we all have to get on board. So I think I am encouraged by the signals that I see in other places. I mean, certainly the Boston Globe is not the only place that's paying attention in a local way, and you named a lot of places that are doing really great work, and Inside Climate News has this like regional reporting network where it's helping kind of lift up journalists who are doing really interesting work on climate, but there's room for a lot more people to come on board.
Yeah, I think about the local angle in North Carolina would be the military. The military is really moving toward clean energy. We have 3 big bases in North Carolina, and that's like a story. No one is telling that story in North Carolina. You know, and actually, I've got a cheat thing. You know, you asked this question, and mindful that I'm talking to journalism students, I've built a team now. It's not just me at North Carolina Health News, and one of the folks who works for me is a Report for America Corps member. And she graduated from UNC's journalism program in 2020. And so I said to her, like, okay, you know, why are you interested in local reporting? And so this is a little quote from her. She said, the main difference between writing local news and covering national news is there's so much news out there that's important to people's lives that's barely reported on, right? A lot of these issues are not partisan. They affect real people. A lot of national news reporting is oversaturated. You're covering the same thing as 20 other news outlets or writing stories based off of tweets. Because local markets are so undercovered, you'll have the opportunity to basically scoop every single story with real reporting. For a lot of us, that's what we got into journalism to do. So, you know, so I think about like in healthcare, geez, Ann, you know, like you look at the healthcare system, people think, oh, the healthcare system is this national thing. It is a state-by-state entity. We say about Medicaid, like which I report on extensively, Medicaid, there are 50 different Medicaid programs in 50 different states. You've seen one Medicaid program, you've seen one Medicaid program. So for example, we have another reporter who spends half of her time thinking about nothing but Medicaid, and then I'm in the center thinking about policy. Like our Medicaid program is unique in the U.S. in that we have $500 million to spend over the next 5 years on social determinants of health, which are those things that, you know, help you be healthy that have nothing to do with medicine or doctors. It might be, you know, I'm someone who has diabetes, I end up at the ER because I can't keep my insulin cold. Well, then maybe we buy that person a refrigerator. So we actually have federal money now to do this pilot. We're doing it in 2 regions of the state. And we'll be able to say, like, hey, these people are doing better than these people. So, you know, no one else has the expertise to report on that. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I've had another, I've got like 2 texts from other local reporters from around the state right now texting me just before we came on going, who do I talk to? Because our state Health and Human Services secretary resigned this morning. And so I've been reporting all day. You know, again, it's the same thing. It's an incredibly complex topic. Hospital closures, Medicaid expansion. You know, up here in the Northeast, everyone has expanded Medicaid. It's, you know, gotten health care. What's your rate of uninsurance in Massachusetts? What, like 2% now?
I have literally no idea.
Like we're still at 13-14% in North Carolina because our state has not chosen to expand Medicaid because of the political problem, right? So, you know, and every once in a while I'll do something, you know, I mean, I got tired of writing the he said, she said thing about Medicaid expansion. Oh, you know, Republicans don't want to do it, the Democrats do. And one time I decided that I'm so tired of this. I talked to Medicaid directors and practitioners in all red states that had expanded. And the story was what happens when a state expands Medicaid, and just got this incredible response from that story because, and I quite literally didn't even mention North Carolina once, but, you know, got these people from all over the country to weigh in on like what they saw as ways of getting at a local story. It's just, there is so much that happens in healthcare policy that's local. You know, Congress can do stuff, but it all happens at your state level.
And I did want to ask, Rose, what has it been like guiding a state-specific, health-focused newsroom during COVID?
Wow. Man, last year was crazy. I mean, I'm just so grateful that I've built the team over the past decade. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary. I actually incorporated on November 7th, so we just celebrated our 10th anniversary. And if COVID had happened in 2018 or even 2019, we wouldn't have been able to respond. We wrote 273 stories in 2019. We wrote 476 stories from March 2020 to March 2021.
Wow. And you mentioned your readership also changed as
Oh
well.
my gosh. So in February 2020, my development director and I, because we're a not-for-profit, we were like, woohoo, we got up to 100,000 uniques for this month, woohoo. End of March, I think we had 350,000 uniques that month. Like, so all of a sudden, people found us, and our traffic exploded. We had a mailing list for a weekly newsletter, a twice-weekly newsletter that was about 6,000 people at the start of COVID. And by the end of 2020, it was up to 14,000 people. People just came flocking to us. And what's been really gratifying, even as, the intensity of COVID has faded, our newsletter mailing list is still more than 14,000 people. You talk to anybody who runs a journalism organization, they'll tell you they had a COVID bump and then it drifted back down. But we've settled back down at around 175,000 uniques a month. So we're doing really well. And our fundraising, today is Giving Tuesday. So our fundraising has done really well. We raised more money from individuals last year than we ever had. We spent more than we ever had. Most of my team are part-time contract workers, so I pay them by the hour. And so we spent a lot of money last year. But luckily, the other thing that happened was because we'd been doing this long enough, local foundations had discovered us, and then last year when COVID hit, and the first month, I was spending about $9,000 a month on freelancers, and in March I spent $26,000, and I projected out like, this is going to be at least a year, and I thought, we're going to sink, we're going to use our entire reserve, and I called up one of our foundation friends and another foundation friend, and next thing you know, we had $70,000 more to spend. So people understand it. They totally COVID. If they didn't get it before COVID, they get it now.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask. We are in a room full of journalism students, many of whom are aspiring to a career in health science or environmental reporting. What advice do you have for them? And in particular, what advice do you have for them, for those of the students who are interested in doing this kind of regional or local reporting? Where does a fresh graduate, journalism graduate start today in 2021 or 2022 if they want to do the kind of reporting that you're both describing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one piece of advice I would give is that, a former intern that I worked closely with at Inside Climate News and I were talking about this recently because she's trying to figure out what her next steps were, and she had been given some advice that she should maybe think about just like a general reporting position and trying to broaden out her expertise and how she was pitching herself. And I disagreed with that because I feel like her resume and her clips show that she's a really good climate reporter. And she's a really good climate reporter. And I think that there is, in the field now, I think that that's valued. I do. When my Twitter, people that I follow on Twitter has really turned into like a climate journalism and climate kind of feed. And I see jobs all the time. A lot of them are not necessarily I'm not necessarily going to see if there's like regional positions that are opening up, because that just doesn't, I don't see that as well. But a lot of like the online kind of digital first publications are doing a lot of hiring. I think that if you are a journalist who wants to do this work, especially on a regional or local level, is just like be ready, be up for the adventure. Like be open to looking for jobs wherever you can find one, and like let this, the first part of your career especially, be an adventure and see where it takes you. Because I think that, you know, being too wed on I want to be at this specific location can be sort of crippling. But there are opportunities out there. And then the flip side, to contradict myself quickly, is to say that if you're somewhere and you see that what you want to be doing doesn't exist, do it. Like make it exist. You know, there's a woman whose last name I'm gonna blank on, Lindsay, I forget her last name.
Gilpin.
Yes, thank you. Who started Southerly. She is so inspiring. You know, she is a great journalist who was kind of initially in the earlier part of her career, recognizing that there was a dearth of environmental and climate reporting in the South, and so she started a nonprofit, and she basically bootstrapped this thing, and she's given voice to really, really great journalists and created this platform where one didn't exist before. And I think there is more space for that kind of work. I mean, it's a big ask to say, like, just go make a nonprofit and like do the thing. But
Isn't it?
But look, here we go.
I'm going to piggyback off of this then.
Please.
So, 10 years ago, when I started, there was no model, there was no roadmap, there was no business model. It really was, the analogy I've been using is like the first spelunker into the cave is the one that gets hit in the head with the rock. And that was me. I really am brain damaged. And so, but now, one of the things that I became a charter member of an organization called Lion Publishers, which is dedicated to, we just rewrote our mission statement, but it's dedicated to helping local journalism organizations launch, grow, and thrive. We have business models. There's not-for-profit, there's for-profit, there's membership-based. There's all kinds of ways to do it. I'm going to use my cheat notes again, and then I'm going to talk about young journalists. But I called our executive director of Lion, and I said, Chris Krusen, he's based in Philly, and I said, what should I be saying to these journalism students? And he said, one of the things I love about millennials is that they refuse to be subjected to hostile work environments that have existed in newsrooms for so long. He said our generations could take a lesson or two from them. But, it is more possible than ever to make your own job, be your own boss, inform your own community. You're not saddled by the weight of a printing plant that is going to have to, that creates this barrier to entry that's impossible to surmount. The guys throwing stuff out of cars every morning. You're not limited by that anymore. And the other thing that he really made a point about, and this is Lindsay very much, that for people who are concerned about equity, this is the path to equity in journalism, right? It's not, people of color or LGBTQ folks or young people like knocking on the door of corporate media run by hedge funds saying like, oh, help us be equitable. And they're like, yeah, whatever, maybe it's profitable or whatever. And this is the opportunity to slay the gatekeeper. And what Chris said to me, I love this. He goes, we as an industry don't get to equity if you're continually knocking on the door. Launching your own media company is the way for people to take a bulldozer and create their own entrance. No hedge fund required. Love it. So, that's my call to young reporters. I mean, you have to get your feet wet. You have to learn your skills. We both went to Berkeley, which really has this value of helping people to specialize, right? So I was able to stick around for an extra year and get a degree in public health policy at Berkeley. I think it took a long time It took about a year and a half for me to find that first journalism job, because everyone was like, this is, again, back in the old days in 2003 and 4, and they were like, well, it's great, you're a nurse and you've got this public health degree. Do you want to write about cops for a year or two until we maybe let you write about healthcare? And I was like, I have the expertise, so there, and to contradict myself, but I do believe in paying dues, right? You have to learn the beat. I think Report for America is a terrific program. We're on our second RFA person. The first one came to us. Her mandate was two beats: prison health and what we call gender health. So it's anything that has a vector of gender, anything from African American men in North Carolina have higher death rates from prostate cancer to something about trans folks in prison, right? Anything like that. Hannah did tremendous work for us. This was our RFA person last year, and completely, she changed state policy with her prison health reporting on COVID, right? Because COVID, these enclosed places where there was disease running rampant and people dying. And so she was able to really dig in, and she took her year of RFA reporting and is now reporting on aging at the Tampa Bay Times. And I was so proud, but I was like, but you took her away. But she was terrific. And then our next person is Elizabeth Thompson. She was at she graduated from Carolina and in June of 2020, and got a job as an intern with the Dallas Morning News, where she was reporting on Capitol Hill, U.S. Capitol Hill, for the Dallas Morning News from her bedroom in Chapel Hill. That was 2020. And so she speaks to this idea, in her quote, that she has a sense of the difference between being a national reporter and chasing the same dang story that, can I swear? Same damn story that everybody is chasing on a given day, versus, really owning it. So she just wrote a story last week on, there's an intersex person in the North Carolina prison system who's asking to be transferred from a male prison to a female prison. And, she was able to dig in to all this stuff about that there's a surprising number of intersex people in prisons across the country. She was able to do these stories, and you just don't get those opportunities. So I think RFA is great. I'm always telling people, young reporters always ask me, do you have any advice? And I always say, marry well. Don't marry another journalist, because I will say that I'm joking, kind of. Only kind of. My husband, I always have to mention my husband, Steve, who has been, if I had not had him, I couldn't have launched North Carolina Health News when I did, when there was no model. He backstopped me for years while I got this up off the ground. Now, of course, I do pay myself, but for a couple of years there I couldn't. And all the other, and this was a real concern of mine early on. The other health news reporting websites, Andy Miller at Georgia Health News, he took his buyout money from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and used that to pay for his first couple of years, and his wife's an accountant and made good money. So, but that's not the case anymore now that there are these models and people get it. And I think about Lindsay. Mm-hmm. Lindsay's she's the lodestar on
Figured
this.
it out. Yeah.
She's figuring it out. I know it's a struggle, but she's doing it.
She has worked her butt off to do it.
She really has.
I will just say, I don't think anybody goes into journalism to get rich.
Absolutely.
I'm married to a teacher and a musician.
Right.
So I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You can get by. You can get by.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we have a question.
Yeah, I thought I would ask the first question in hopes that my students will be right behind me. Feel free to come up when you've got a question. So I think that people are so excited by the nonprofit models, and whether they're working or fully nonprofit as a North Carolina Health News, or some positions at commercial media that are funded nonprofit. I know, Sabrina, that's not the case for you. But there are a lot of environmental positions now around the country, and climate and medical positions that are actually working for commercial media but funded on nonprofit, funded by foundations. So it's very exciting, but it also makes me nervous because of the sustainability factor. And like the Reporting for America model and a lot of the National Foundation funders, they're all sort of operating under the assumption that this is startup. This is to get you going, but it's not going to be an indefinite commitment. So I think what I worry about is are we going to be able to keep this thing going? This is a great moment right now, but can we keep it going? So I'm interested in what you.
As someone who writes a lot of grants, I will say I think that landscape, Dan, is shifting. It took me a few years to get our first foundation grant. I remember having a lunch with a guy in 2012 with the Kate B. Reynolds Trust. It's all tobacco money funding healthcare stuff in North Carolina. And he said, yeah, we're going to fund you. And I went into the bathroom. I was like, right. And then I come back out to the table, and he's like, I'm just not sure when. And I was like, oh. And they didn't give us funding until 2015. They have increased their funding every year ever since, because what they've done, and my value proposition that I make to them, is not about page views, right? Because we're never going to be able to compete with, New York Times or whatever. But what the value proposition is that our state, and this is, again, it gets that regional thing, our state needs this in order for citizens, voters, to make better decisions about what's happening out there. And I neglected, when talked just a moment ago, to mention that we have a job that I just got funded for last week from a foundation, a state-based foundation, that they gave us $15,000 and they gave us $30,000, and they've finally funded us for a full-time person for 3 years. And I've found that once you have that full-time person, then you can keep going. And I'm not seeing the foundation money going away. At the national level, that very well could be the case. But foundation funders are always like, that sustainability question. How are you going to sustain this? And we are working pretty assiduously on, I don't just fundraise, from foundations. Today's, like I said, today's Giving Tuesday. Did I mention that yet? And so we fundraise from individuals. We have sponsors, website sponsors. We've got lobbying firms that, are website sponsors, the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians, and I'm very clear when I make the ask or when we do the contract that, like, nothing your $5,000 this year is not going to get you any preferential coverage. And so we are all revenue streams that we can get. So the not-for-profit folks are not just looking for grants. So I'm actually more optimistic than I was. Also, I know this is going to be anathema, but via Lion Publishers and also the Institute for Nonprofit News, which is very focused on not-for-profit, but Lion is not-for-profit, for-profit. We just got $5 million last year from Google, because Google figured out that there's a democracy problem, and that they've been sucking all the ad revenue away from people, and so they're helping Lion create boot camps, journalism boot camp startups. Lion has, I think, 15 journalism entrepreneurs who are getting paid $50,000 for a first year to start themselves up, to get bootstrapped up, and that's just all local journalism. It's not just health and science, it's and environment. It's all kinds of local journalism. So I think people are starting to recognize that there's a real problem. Unless we have good reporting, there's a real problem with our democracy. And so I think that I kind of feel like that the foundations are going to be around for a while in this space. And did I mention that we have a job opening? Environmental health, come to North Carolina, report on hog farms and PFAS in the rivers and legacy of let me see, the legacy of manufacturing, textile manufacturing. We've got, there's all kinds of great stuff happening in North
coal ash
Carolina.
over there?
Oh, you got some coal ash.
Piles of it, right?
We've got like landfills, or we've got playgrounds built on top of landfills in neighborhoods of color.
Sounds like heaven.
Oh, it's a heaven for an environmental reporter. Man, you can really.
Less so for someone that's living there, probably.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. It's but yeah, we've so watch for the job opening. I'm gonna place it soon. It's this week.
I also think this is a good time to ask you about what you mentioned about the Globe, and the Globe, which is a newsroom that has made it a priority to cover the climate crisis as a team. When I was at a newspaper, I was the only science and environment reporter. There was one woman who covered health, and that was really it. And so I was really struck when you said that had become sort of a newsroom-wide mission. And I think, I'd love to hear more about what that's looked like, and also what it has meant for you specifically as a climate reporter, to be in a newsroom that is taking on this story with you.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. I mean, so I was in a nonprofit setting, being at Inside Climate News, but it was one that, the books were open. We knew how things were going. It was stable. Like, I knew I had a great job that I really loved, and it didn't feel like it was going anywhere, and it was helping me support my family. And I was not looking for a job, and suddenly this Globe thing came up. And my first question was, is this a grant-funded position? Because it just felt like it would not have been a wise move for me as someone with 2 little kids in a house to take something that could be gone in a year. And no, it was something that they had spent a lot of time with, they had worked into their budget, and they were really committed to doing. And that was something that made me feel a lot more confident in making the move. And then I started learning more about what the plan was. So, at the same time that the job post for my position went up, so did a posting for a producer for a new climate team. And so since I came on, now that position has been filled by this incredibly talented woman who I get to work with, which is great because she's also kind of deep in the climate space with me. But what's been really fascinating and exciting is that there is this palpable energy at the Globe where they're recognizing that we probably should have gotten on board with this coverage sooner. We didn't. We're here now. Let's do it. And so I'm regularly talking with, whether it's our transportation reporter, people from our business desk. There's actually a woman who is half-time on our business desk, half-time on, our soon-to-be officially launched climate desk, looking at consumerism and climate change. There is this real desire to help infect the entire newsroom, to tell the climate story from other beats too. And there's been talk of my creating and I've started working on it, kind of a cheat sheet, so that when we're getting quick stories up about an extreme weather event or really any kind of story that could touch on climate change, it could be about a transportation initiative like a highway expansion or whatever it may be, that there's a paragraph that succinctly explains what the latest and most reliable scientific sources say about it, so that they can take my language and plug it into a story and get it up right on deadline before
That's so cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
That's so cool.
But what's even cooler is that when I pitched this idea, the top editors of the paper were like, yes, let's do it. Let's send it to the copy desk. It's still something that's in progress, right? We haven't fully done it yet, so let's not, count our chickens till it's done. But the support that I've had around this idea of standardizing the way and making sure that stories we're not missing opportunities to send the message home that this event that you're seeing is climate. And also only saying that when it's true. We don't want to overstate it. But when can you say it, when can you not? And we don't miss the opportunities to do it. And this, I've been really, really blown away by the support for that.
Yeah, it's very hopeful.
Yeah, it's exciting.
We have another question from the audience.
Hey, thank you so much for coming here. My name is Wenji. I'm one of the students here. So I kind of want to ask a question about sourcing. So I think that you both alluded that you were very lucky at the Triangle. There's a lot of biomedical institutions, and in Boston, there's also a biohub. I'm very passionate about local reporting, so I took an internship at Baltimore Magazine this summer, and I felt incredibly lucky that we had Hopkins and UMD. I was like, I don't know what to do if there's no those major biomedical institutions locally. So would you do something differently if you were working in the middle of nowhere in a small town that doesn't really have household name famous institutions, and would you feel constrained or do something differently on your workflow on that end?
I think if it's healthcare, the very first thing you do is you join the Association of Healthcare Journalists. Like, it is just it is a fabulous organization. And I'm not just saying that because the former president of the board is sitting in the audience. I require all of my team members to be members of AHCJ. I pay for them all to be. It's a bargain. It's like $35 a year for a student. I pay for it for my interns. And so you're looking for a source, right? You'll get value out of AHCJ just from the listserv, because you put something up, you're like, I need a sleep doctor who focuses on 12-year-old girls with deviated septums. Like, you can come up with something really particular, and within 24 hours, 3 people have been like, oh, well, you should talk to Dr. Jones in Portland, Maine, because he blah, 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 and here's his contact information, tell him I sent you, right? So that's the first thing I would do. You don't need to have some great center right near you.
Would you feel weird to talk to someone in Boston if you're reporting for North Carolina, or would you constrain yourself, or was that necessary or not?
There's, North Carolina is, it can feel very parochial, and so and if we do have a lot of resources, right? But I do go outside of the state. But if you're in a small place, right? If you're reporting in a place. I'm trying to think of some place like Western Kansas. It wouldn't be strange, and all the national folks do it, right? They'll just glean from the best sources around the country. So I wouldn't feel strange about it at all.
Yeah, I do it all the time. Because I think so often, especially as you get more specific in what you're looking for, even though there are a wealth of resources in the Boston area, there might not be the person. And so I'm regularly talking with scientists I talked to somebody who was developing an interesting kind of pavement that was really kind of climate forward, who was in Arizona, a couple weeks ago. It's a very normal thing to pick up the phone. I have never once had someone indicate any strangeness about my doing that. But I will say this, I think going back to advice for newer journalists, it is scary talking to people that you've never talked to before when you were not used to it, until you get used to it. And then you don't even think about it. And it's just this routine thing that you do, and you figure out what's your approach to softening someone up and making them feel comfortable and trying to make them laugh and feeling like this is a real conversation and we are not both robots trying to exchange information. And a lot of that, I think, is what you gain from your first journalism experience. Your first journalism experience is not, unless you're certain weirdos who win Pulitzers at age 24. But it's not where you knock it out of the park necessarily. It's where you figure it out. So in my first job, which was not a dream in some ways and was a total dream in other ways, I was a crime reporter at the Taunton Daily Gazette, 13,000 circulation. I made $27,000 a year. And I would work 60 hours a week. I wrote so many stories. But one of the things that they made me do was there would be this question of the week that you had to ask, where it was man on the street, ask somebody. I remember having to stand in a Walmart parking lot in Taunton, Massachusetts, asking people, what do you feel about what's happening on the Gaza Strip right now?
Wow. Oh, I'm so sorry.
It was utterly mortifying. People would look at me like, why the hell are you talking to me, girl? You know, I'm 5'0", coming out from in between parked cars in a parking lot. People think they're being mugged by some strange tiny woman. And I'm asking them about the Gaza Strip. It was so bad. It was so bad, it's hard to imagine it getting worse. But because it was so bad, like, I will ask anybody anything now. I will enjoy it. And so I think, like, getting past that part of you that feels even that hesitation is a really important step, because at the end of the day, people love talking about their work. People like talking about their lives and their work and the things that they care about. And your job as a journalist is to ask them about those things. You are giving them a gift by giving them the platform, and value their time. And you know what I mean? Like if you're going to talk to them, do so with the expectation that you're going to use what they have, or be, you know, in communication with them and make them feel good about whatever it is that happens. But really, like, it's not just like a one-way street. They get something out of it too. And so I think just feeling like we're in this together and we're just telling the story and trying to get to the bottom of it. You're doing the work, I'm telling the story and giving that work a platform. It's a great thing.
Yeah. Along the lines of, like, advice to young journalists, the other thing is I always say, like, you know, look for a smaller newsroom where you're going to have a lot of interaction with your editor. Like, I have 2 pretty young journalists working with me right now, and Hannah last year, and actually I've mentored a whole slew of young journalists, and they get a lot of time with me. And it's not sort of face-to-face, because we've always been a remote newsroom. We've always been online only, as we're all scattered across the state. But every week I have an hour-long sit-down with each of my full-time younger reporters to, you know, help them shaping stories, help them developing story ideas. What are the problems you're having? You know, like, how do you feel about this? Is that going okay for you? And I'm not sure you're going to get that if you know, end up at a much larger outlet. Like, you're just not going to get that FaceTime with somebody. So, and that's and everyone has said that. Like, I keep track of all my old interns. I write to them all, like, once a year and say, hey, what are you doing? And I, you know, hear about them getting married and having babies. And one of my old interns who now is at CNN, and she said, we had a job opening, and I was like, would you, you know, share it in your circles? And she wrote back, she said, of course I will. I wouldn't be here if it hadn't worked for you.
That's awesome.
And I was like, I get a little verklempt thinking about it, you know. So, and I hear that from my interns all the time, like, that, you know, that just having that intensive one-on-one really helps.
And I would just like to say that my first day at a summer internship at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, my assignment was, there's a boat that's been in the same spot for a couple of days, and we keep getting emails because people are wondering what the boat is. Can you figure out what that boat is, why it's not moving? I had just moved to Milwaukee, and that was my first assignment.
Was there a good answer?
There was a really good answer. It was a cargo ship, and it had dropped off its cargo, but it had not yet received its next assignment, and so it could not leave the port of Milwaukee without saying where it was going. But what I did, I drove up to the shore, and I was, like, asking people, like, do you
know what's up with that boat?
Do you know what that is? I went into a restaurant. I asked the manager there. So, but it is valuable experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think we have another question. Yeah.
So y'all have kind of talked a little bit about kind of the role of national reporters. I'm kind of curious, as local journalists, especially with, like, specialized topics, you know, how you think about the role of national journalists, especially telling local stories. I was reporting a story that was, like, very local recently, and was, I don't know, just very mindful of how odd that felt to be reporting a story on a topic that I was familiar with, but in a place that I wasn't. So I guess, you know, tips for national reporters, how do you prefer to interact with them? Do you prefer to interact with them? And just anything you can say about, you know, folks working for these sort of science health pubs that are, you know, trying to do local stories.
Yeah, I mean, I've done more national reporting than I have local, both as a reporter working on productions for the PBS show Frontline, and also at Inside Climate News. And yeah, it can be a little bit both intimidating and you realize like you might be stepping on some toes, when you parachute in, which is uncomfortable. When I was in that role, let's see, sometimes we would strike up friendships with local reporters, and you just have to be mindful of like not taking advantage of people, of not trying to mine them for sources, because that is a really just sort of a shitty thing to do, right? Like they do all the work, and then you kind of
Waltz in,
take all the credit,
and then get it wrong.
Yeah, don't get stuff wrong, in general.
How can people think about balancing, acknowledging that you're talking to someone who is an expert without doing that? Because I have the same question about balancing sort of acknowledging that this person is a wealth of information without exploiting it.
Right.
Well, I mean, you could just meet up for a beer.
Meet up for beer. Acknowledge that you
or coffee.
Right. Or acknowledge that you've read a bunch of their stuff. Right? Like, oh, I've read 15 of your stories. Wow, thank you. Like, thank you for doing that reporting. Like, just acknowledge that we're out there. Because, as my husband will say, I have a chip on my shoulder, but I've earned it. Or come by it honestly. So being a local reporter in a legislature that's made a lot of news, especially around healthcare, remember the bathroom bill? Yeah, it was North Carolina. That's why we have the gender health beat. Right? Because I was like, we need to report on this. We had a lot of people parachute in and kind of, it's always like a degree off. And, and the people in the newsroom at the legislature would all be like, oh, that guy from the New York Times, he kind of didn't get it right. And, but it shows some respect for the work that the local folks have done. And don't mind them.
I think you could acknowledge, hey, I feel a little bit silly about this because I'm reporting this from a national perspective. You have done incredible work, and I want you to know it is not my intention to take advantage of that. Right. The other thing is, just make sure the links get in your story. Link and tweet about the other people that have contributed to this work, because it is such a small thing, but national publications so regularly leave those links out, and that hurts your feelings.
It's rude.
Yeah, it is.
And it's sort of like the links, and also acknowledge local outlet North Carolina Health News reported blah blah blah. It went, I broke this story a few years ago about the governor lying about our Medicaid program, and all these other. There were some people who wrote about it, like they piggybacked off me. The AP guy. I really appreciated the fact that he totally gave me credit. Yeah. That we broke the story, that we got the documents, blah blah blah, where other people didn't, and it was like. Yeah, that's just rude, I
don't think it's intentionally rude when it happens. I think it's just that people aren't giving it, they're not bothering to care. Yeah, well, they're not bothering to, stop for a second. I'm on deadline. Just stop for a second and say, right, I know this because Rose reported it. Let me just write that.
Yeah, exactly, right, exactly. Or, you know it because you, like the stuff about Massachusetts, someone should totally be giving you props for that.
Would either of you agree, for example, to be interviewed as experts in your own right and quoted in a piece?
Oh, that feels so weird.
No. I would gladly tell them who other experts are, but I wouldn't. I mean, it would be strange for someone who's a real competitor to ask you for sources, and so. But even so, I gotta say, I've done it. I'm a pushover. If a competitor sent me an email and was like, Sabrina, I want to write this story that you've already written, I would probably just send them emails. Okay, contact these 4 people. Here's how you can find them. I probably would. But
well, I mean, what happens with us is we keep an impact file. We have a spreadsheet, and all my team has, and I'm like, oh, so when the News and Observer basically either piggybacks on you or redoes your story 3 days after we did it, we call it a win. And we put it into our impact file, and we say this story was published after we wrote that story. And so then we can say, again, our value proposition is not on page views necessarily, but on how we're influencing the media landscape and in the media environment in North Carolina. So, there are a lot of stories that we've reported on. Like we've done, I mean, I use this word really infrequently, but we've done groundbreaking reporting on harm reduction for opioid overdose in North Carolina. And no one else did that reporting until we did it. We're doing, one of my people, Taylor Knopf, is doing incredible work right now on the state's reliance on involuntary commitment to get people who need psychiatric care into psychiatric hospitals. So like they get shackled and put in the back of a police car and then taken to a psychiatric hospital, and that's the only way you can get in, right? And that the state's reliance on it had increased like 90% over the past decade. So everyone else is sort of following us now. So we just call all of that a win.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the many advantages that we've already talked about, is that direct impact. The impact feels so much closer. The readers are right there. I think, Sabrina, you mentioned this earlier, you can sustain focus very closely over many years. I know, Rose, you and I talked about that as well. What are some of the other kinds of advantages, really, of being a local reporter versus perhaps a national reporter who's just parachuting in? What are some of the advantages of being there and being focused and trained and that close to readers and that close to impact and real impact?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, being a beat reporter is so much fun because you really, you build these relationships when something happens. I've been at the Globe since May, right? It has been a minute, hardly a second. But already, when something happens, I can think of 10 people to call who can talk to me from different perspectives, science, advocacy, whatever it may be, about to inform this and give this story depth. I can go to the location to find the human beings who are impacted by something and actually put a face on the story, because then it's going to actually matter more and more people will read it. There's so many advantages to it because there's just that much more at your fingertips. I mean, just right before this, I was the Arctic reporter reporting from Maine. I had built up a great source list over the years, in part by doing a lot of trips to the North Slope and other places, so I had real people I could call. I knew a lot of scientists, but it was so much harder to do that work in a way that would resonate with readers. I had to do a lot more work. It was less possible for me to quickly turn around something with a lot of depth because of just the physical distance.
I say this is another sort of, as you were talking, I remembered another piece of advice I give to young reporters is start a Google spreadsheet with the people you talk to, and it's Hoban, Rose, editor, NC Health News, a couple phone numbers, email address, and some notes, right? Like swears a lot. Lives in Chapel Hill, has a really cute furry dog, because then it helps with that sort of hey, how you doing, blah, blah, blah. Because today, just like you say, you get to know people. Mm-hmm. You really do. So today, as I mentioned, our state health and human services secretary resigned after 5 years. It's like the longest tenure in 2 decades or something. She's led us through the pandemic. She has 2 little kids. She wants to spend time with them. And this is what so as soon as I heard it, I'm texting her deputy, and then I'm texting her other deputy, and then I'm texting the state Medicaid head. I had conversations with each of these people. The Medicaid head is a guy who I interviewed and worked with on a story back when he was the head of the ARC of North Carolina, which works with people with developmental disabilities. And, so I met him 14 years ago, so I know him pretty well, and it's not about 3-4 years ago, his stepson died of just horrible, 26 years old with a brain tumor. And I'd met this guy, his name is Dave Richard. I'd met his wife. They came to an event that we did about psychiatric stuff. His wife is a psychiatric social worker. So I'd met them. So, you do nice things. You sort of keep that relationship going, like, hey, Dave, heard about your stepson. I'm really sorry. Give my best to Holly, right? Like, so you have these relationships so that today, when his boss decides to step down, he made 20 minutes for me in the middle of what was probably a completely insane day. And we had a really great conversation. So I got the whole inside story of how the stuff, so the other reporters aren't going to have that in their story of her resignation, right? So you have these deep relationships. I have a contact spreadsheet that's probably got 2,000 contacts on it. Sometimes like when my husband and I travel, people still love having their business cards. I sit in the passenger seat and I just add them in. And when I get someone's, business card, I'll flip it over and I'll say, has a different haircut than she had in her headshot. Was on a panel with her in 2021, and so you have that touch point. So that when you write to them or you text them or you tweet at them, you're like, hey, we were on that panel 3 years ago, remember me? And then they're more likely to pick up the phone and call you back, right?
And something that I wanted to bring up was a story that you did this summer. It feels like another sort of advantage here. It was a piece about the stormwater surges, I think, and about the way that heavy summer storms were flooding aging sewage infrastructure and releasing, millions of gallons
of untreated raw sewage.
Oh, yeah, we had that too.
Really gross.
Love a CSO release.
I love those.
And in the story, you went out with a volunteer for the local watershed, and while you were there, some people were rowing in the water nearby. There were kids that showed up for camp. You described the smell being so thick you could taste it. I mean, those are things that you could only really report on, and details you could include if you were there. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that value of being local, of being there, of being present in the place that you're writing about.
So for that story in particular, like it is a known phenomenon that in a lot of places the water drain, the water line and the sewer line, when it rains too much, they can overflow and they kind of all go in together. And then there are designated release points so that instead of it going into your basement, it goes into locations that are, considered okay to go into. In this case, this is the Merrimack River in Massachusetts, which happens to be a public drinking water source. So questionable that it would be an okay place for it to go, but it has to go somewhere, right? We haven't yet ripped up all these pipes and figured it out, so they're working on it. So I wanted to know what that looked like, and I wanted to go out with the guy as he was doing the test. I thought that was all I was going to get. I thought I was going to go out with a volunteer. We'd take a little test. We'd see what it was, and I'd write a nice little scene that would top a story that was largely a science story. But instead, it ended up being a people story because, like you said, there were children at the camp. There were scullers who were rowing on the water. I learned from one of them about his friend. Ended up talking to this woman who the summer before had taken a little break from rowing, and then she ended up rowing again. She had lost the calluses on her hand. And so she got a sore. When she got out of the river, she realized she was bleeding a little bit. She knew she needed to deal with it, so she washes her hands right away. She goes back to her house. She washes more. She had plans in Boston that day, so she goes into Boston, and as she's doing it, her hand is like starting to swell up and swell up, and it's throbbing, and that's getting worse and worse, and her husband keeps saying, we got to go get it checked out. And she finally says, fine, but we're going to go to quick care. Like, I'm not going to the hospital because we've got dinner plans tonight. I think they're going to a show or something. And she goes in, and the person looks at her and is like, you need to get to the ER right away. They go to the ER. She's still trying to minimize it. She says, apparently, they were like, you can leave, but you're not taking your arm with you. Yeah. Because she had the telltale line that went right up to her heart. Yep. She had to have, it was like 4 courses of antibiotics. Nothing was working to fight this staph infection. And she very nearly lost her arm. This was because there is raw sewage coursing through a river that is a location that children play on, that people swim in, that people are out rowing on, and people are drinking. It's also a science story because there was good scientific research that showed how incidents of people being hospitalized for gastrointestinal problems went up when there had been a large release, right? So
what a great story.
it was a really fun one to report, and one that really kind of put several, not one face, but several faces on the ways in which this kind of wonky, antiquated problem really plays out in people's lives in a really big way.
And also, not what we think of when we think of a climate story.
No.
Right?
No, but more extreme weather, more extreme rainfall, which is something we were experiencing at that part of the summer, and we had record rains in Massachusetts and in many other places this summer. That's what it looks like. It looks like places flooding that didn't used to flood. It looks like beaches eroding further. It looks like big CSO releases.
And we have another question from the audience.
Hi, my name is Lyric. Thanks for being here tonight. So we've been talking about local journalism a lot, and I just wanted to know, for much smaller papers, in smaller counties and cities that still have these interesting environmental and health policy and science stories, but might not have the budget to have, beat reporters on these subjects, what can you do as a reporter who's interested in some of these smaller towns and areas, but they just might not have what it takes to make it work? I mean, do you think you could still create your own position or go in with these new ideas, or what would you suggest?
It's a little bit of all of the above. I mean, one of the things I've said to younger reporters sometimes, like, some of my old interns, they're like, well, I'm going to go this place, and, it's just a GA. And I was like, well, it's a GA, but, like, you can just always gravitate toward the healthcare stories, right? Like, look at things from a healthcare angle. Keep pitching those things to your editor, that, those are some of the stories you want. And so you can begin to build that expertise as you also are going out and, like, reporting on the festival on Saturday, right? Because those are the easy things to write. Those are the, like, this happened today. You go out, you get the color, you write it, it's done, in a couple hours. But you can just keep chipping away at the other things that you really like. I think that's one way to approach it. I don't know, you have any other thoughts?
I have a couple thoughts. One is partnerships. I think years ago, the idea of one publication teaming up with another publication to do a story was like poison. Like, nobody was going to do it. Never. But that was like a thing that I did a lot of when I was with Frontline. We worked with Frontline. It was Frontline and ProPublica. We would team up on things. Actually, my desk was in the ProPublica office for several years because we would collaborate on stuff. And it used to be that it had to be more like different media. Like, you could write, like, they were documentary, they were words, like, we could work together. I think there's less of a requirement for that even, and more of an expectation that partnering can really benefit both publications. It's something that Inside Climate News does a lot, both in partnering up. They've got this great series that they're doing right now on the idea of ecocide, which is that you can have a crime against nature. And that they're partnering with, it's really great, they're partnering with NBC on that. So they've got, like, this incredible niche reporting, but now it's being, like, blasted out to a huge audience. But they also do a lot of partnering to smaller publications, and those would be local places. And the local places, what they benefit from is both the expertise on the editing staff at Inside Climate News, because even if you are chipping away and continuing to gravitate toward those stories, your editor might not know it. It's really specialized stuff. And if you're going to do it well, you need to have somebody in the trenches with you. And so that might be something that you have to look for outside of the place where you work. But I do think that there is a lot of excitement and energy around doing that.
And willingness.
Absolutely. And I will say, again, I feel like I'm, like, kind of waving an Inside Climate News banner here, but I really loved working there. But they have something that they call their regional reporting network, where they do trainings in the Midwest, in the South. They might have some others that are launching soon, I think, too, where journalists from within that coverage area can sign up to do training sessions, and then they'll often like pitch stories and develop stories with the the regional reporter who's doing that work. And so that's a really kind of a cool thing.
And this is, I do another pitch for AHCJ, because AHCJ, they have an annual conference, which is just like you walk away and your brain hurts because you learned so much. You meet people who can help you perhaps with that partnering, or who might be able to, give you some tips. Like, you can say, like, I know my editor doesn't know this. I really want to write this story because you've sat in on a session. Like, can I call you? People are amazingly generous. And, even if you, AHCJ is, pro tip here, they have lots of scholarships for people. So, even if you don't have the dough to get there, there's a pretty good chance. Like, they have Midwest reporting scholarships and, Southeast reporting, and the reporting scholarships for, people with nose rings. I mean, like, there's lots of different reporting scholarships. So to get to the conference, and so you can network there. And yes, absolutely, on partnering. Like, if you know that there's a newsroom like mine in your state, like, get your editor to call. And sometimes, like, one of the things I think, I'm so jazzed about what they're doing at the Globe, right? Because one of the things that I've found is that there's still a lot of ossification in legacy media, that they're just not willing to kind of like, try different things and be flexible, right? And that is something that I think that, I'm completely wowed by what they're doing. Yeah. And then, for a small organization like us, like we kind of have to be flexible, because we, that's the secret sauce that we're able to bring, right? We don't have like the firepower, but we've got the panache.
I will just add that the Society for Environmental Journalists would be like the environmental corollary, which is also a really, really wonderful resource.
Yeah,
and there's local chapters.
And they're both really, really well-run organizations.
Yeah. And also, I would add, as a freelancer myself, it is possible to freelance from a place that's not on either coast, and to own as a sort of one-person newsroom and say, I am the newsroom, and I'm going to look for clients who want to tell my stories. I'm thinking about I'm working on a piece right now that's based in my hometown in Rochester, Minnesota. I'm doing that reporting in person, but it doesn't have a home yet. So I think there's also ways, if there is a particular community or state that you want to cover, and if, you want to be a freelancer or an independent journalist, it's also possible to do this independently. Maybe you start a Substack, maybe you find funding for a Substack, maybe you decide these are the 4 stories I really want to do in this community, and I'm just going to find a home for them. And that might be a newspaper in the state, that might be a news organization where for example, if it's a health story in North Carolina, or it might be for a national publication, but you're saying the value that I'm bringing you is that I'm reporting it as a local reporter and not as someone who's parachuting in. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can do that kind of thing.
It's the avenues are now so much more varied. It's kind of, it means that you have to be a little more either flexible in how you think about it, right? Like, it's not just going to be one thing or the other. It could be any one of these things. The other thing is that it sort of gets me back to that, advice for young journalists is make friends with, somebody who's on the advertising side of your journalism program. Because if you are going to launch, boy, it'd be really good to have somebody who has a little bit of business sense, and maybe take an accounting course. I had to learn the hard way, but just to have somebody who's got some of those chops, because then it might be that you find yourself doing these kinds of stories over and over, and then you think, like Lindsay Gilpin, maybe this is the time to think about a regional publication that is dedicated to environmental, or dedicated to healthcare or something like that. But it's always really helpful to have someone who understands the business side.
Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome. Good luck.
Is there? Yeah, I thought so.
Oh,
there's another.
She was hiding behind the post there.
So my name is Niranjana, and I was wondering if the pandemic has affected the way in which local reporting is done, because as Sabrina said, one of the biggest advantages of local reporting is to go to the actual location, meet people, have a direct connect with them. So Like, was there a difficulty during the pandemic, when the pandemic especially started, or how is it now?
I have a hard time answering that, in part because secret, I live in Maine, but I work for the Boston Globe. And I think a lot of the reason why that was never an issue when I was hired, again, during the pandemic, was because they had realized, like, oh, we can actually do incredibly impactful work without always being on location. I think to rely solely on that would be wild and a terrible choice. But there's a lot that you can do. So for me, I'm much closer than I was to the Arctic. I get in my car and I can be on the Merrimack River watching people paddle away in sewage within 2 hours. But and I do regularly, and I will be doing it more post-pandemic if that exists. But I do think, I think that a lot of, I would have been interested to have been at the Globe when that shift happened, because I would imagine that everything got turned on its head. I would imagine they had to rethink a lot of the ways that things are done. But I was at an operation that's similar to where you are. We were all remote. We had been Zooming since before people knew what that meant.
Yep.
It was seamless when the pandemic hit. Nothing changed except we had more money and we were not traveling. But our stories were just as hard hitting and just as impactful because there was no real change. So I wish I could answer that better. I will say I will definitely be physically present in the Boston area a lot more post-pandemic.
And I will say, I really miss being out in the field. Oh boy. And I was talking to Elizabeth, my Report for America person, and I was like, I was out doing something, and I stopped in this little town. I was like, oh, you ever been to Sax Paw? She's like, no. And I'm like, geez, it's only 20 miles away. She's like, well, pandemic. And I was like, oh, yeah. Right. So I think, I think folks, they appreciate that you are from the local publication. They see the stuff once they know your publication, and so you have that kind of built-in. They'll have a built-in affinity for you. But then, I'm really looking forward to actually being able to. We were able to go out and take a photo. I've got people all over the state, so it'd be like, hey, Tommy, could you drive down to down there, and you're in Richmond County, and take a picture of this. And so at least we had art, and you have someone standing in front of the local jail, and so we were able to do some of that stuff. But it's a similarly kind of squishy answer. Sorry.
Yeah, but that's the best part of the job.
It is the best part of the job.
Not sitting at
and
your
getting
computer.
to know people.
Yeah,
it's awesome. It's just awesome.
And we have about 5 minutes left. Is that another question? Yeah.
Well, we're just getting rolling.
I know.
Hi, my name is Delger. I just finished up my internship at Inside Climate News.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. My question is about whether you guys have any advice for kind of switching between different formats of journalism. I feel like if you want to get into local and regional media, not all of it, but a lot of it is in daily newspapers and public radio. But I feel like the stories that we're doing right now for class and a lot of the early career opportunities that are out there right now are more digital first, that kind of journalism. Mm-hmm. Has that ever been a problem for you guys? Or Sabrina, did you have to make the case for the Boston Globe that you could do daily newspaper reporting?
Okay, I've worked for a small daily newspaper, now a major regional newspaper. I've interned at the Associated Press and the Wall Street Journal. ProPublica, doing deep investigative stuff. Inside Climate News, doing a lot more accountability, deep stuff. PBS Frontline. I've written for magazines. I've done produced interactive documentaries for Frontline and ProPublica. I mean, I feel like I've managed to check a lot of boxes without ever anybody being like, wait a minute, you're not invited here. You've done weird stuff before. I think that there is far less attention paid to that and far more attention paid to okay, what's the through line? The through line for me for the last decade has been environmental accountability reporting. It sort of doesn't matter what the format is or what the platform is or whether you read it physically in a newspaper or on some website. I don't think that people pay attention to that. I didn't know when I started talking to the editor at the Boston Globe, like, are they going to be interested in me coming from Inside Climate News? Now I can tell you they were. I mean, here I am. So I would say don't stress it. I would also say, especially to the women out there, that what's that statistic about how much more, when there's like job requirements in a listing, that like men, if they have like 2 out of 10, will fire off an application, whereas a woman, if she can't check every box, might be reluctant to do so.
Yeah, right.
Don't be reluctant to do so.
Yeah.
Apply for everything that seems even remotely exciting or scary, because you just don't know.
I love that. Apply for things that seem scary. Like, definitely try for things that seem scary. I have not checked as many boxes as you are. And the thing that I always think about is that the thing that's the commonality everywhere is the writing, is like making sure your writing is strong. Because if you're in broadcast, it's words that are in broadcast, right? It's unless you're only taking photographs, it's only visual media. You really, like, the writing is always going to be the backbone of what you do, and good sourcing, good reporting, good fact checking, just the basics. Like, don't kind of disparage just having really strong basics. And it seems kind of like, well, yeah, whatever. Like, but no, like, because you run into people who don't have strong basics, and then I'm like, oh, wow, like, I can't run this story because, like, wait, did you get a quote? Like, did you talk to the person, right? Like, just give, like, I really need the basics, and have them be strong.
Yeah. And I would also say, like, this might also sound sort of like hokey, but bringing a lot of integrity to the work that you do.
Yeah, that.
Like sometimes I'll talk to sources and I'll need to talk to them off the record about something, and they might seem initially reluctant to talk to me, and they're sort of like, well, I don't know if I feel comfortable, and I usually say something along the lines of, I get it. I don't know if I would feel comfortable, but I can tell you this, I've been doing this for, coming up on 2 decades, and I have conversations like this all the time, and if I was burning my sources or treating people in a way that they didn't like, I wouldn't be able to do my job. And I'm happy to send you stories that I've written where I've relied on, off-the-record sourcing or background sourcing, where you'll read the story and you would never know it. Because I think that just lets you do your job.
Yeah, no, it's like, it's really important to be good to people. Yeah. I mean, it seems so basic, but like, but there were people who are really jerks. And then they wonder why, like, they can't get people to talk to them.
Right.
Yeah. Ed Young did a Q&A, I think it was with Neiman's Storyboard recently, but where his advice to journalists was, instead of asking people to trust you, show them why you're trustworthy.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah,
and I think that's really great advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we've gone 90 minutes, and I think we should probably declare victory.
That went fast.
It was a really great discussion. Huge thanks to our 3 panelists, to Rose and to Sabrina, and to Marion for really raising a lot of really interesting and very timely issues. And for those of you who are watching online, thank you for sticking with us. And you can always see all of the Kavli conversations on science communication at journalism.nyu.edu/KC. And we will do these again next semester. We hope in person. We hope with an audience that will be able to include more than just the students and faculty. And we hope that we'll just be able to sort of get on with life. But it's a little too early to know for sure. But one way or the other, we'll be doing this. And special thanks also to Stacey Bailey at the Kavli Foundation, who makes all this possible. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. This was fun.